So today I'm going to show you how to do a UI point system so we can actually see how many things we picked up inside our game. I do want to mention that there is a lot of ways you can do things using UI. We're not going to cover everything because that would make for a very long video. But what we will do is I will take you through how to create a UI, and we will talk a bit about how the UI functions and then how to display point systems inside a UI element like you see inside most video games. I think this episode is a good place to expand into other episodes. And then at a later point, we can always add in more tutorials that show us how to do more things using UI elements. So to begin with here, as you can see, we have a character that can run around. He has animations, we can pick up things. I moved around my platforms a bit since the previous episode, so they are a little bit lower. But as you can see, we can run into fireflies and pick them up. And then we just simply, well, that's basically it. We can't do much more than that. Now, the basic idea here, just for now, is that once we pick up a firefly, we want to display at the top how many fireflies we picked up. And this involves having to create a UI and then also changing some of the data inside the UI using a script. So there's a couple of things here that we need to get into. The first thing we're going to do is we need to actually create a user interface, or what is called a canvas. I'll go into my hierarchy and I'll right click, go down to UI, and then as you can see, we have many different user interface elements that we could include inside our game. And like I said, this is going to be a very long tutorial if we have to talk about every single one of them. But for now, what I want to focus on is we want to create something called a canvas. And a canvas is basically just the container that is going to contain all the different UI elements. So what we can do is we can select one of the UI elements that is not the canvas, because the canvas gets automatically created once we pick any of the other UI elements. And I'm going to say, you know what, let's go ahead and create some text. Now, we have something inside Unity called text, and we have something called TextMeshPro. TextMeshPro used to be a plugin that we could download off the asset store, but Unity went in and bought it off the people who made it. So we now have TextMeshPro as part of the Unity assets that we can just sort of use. And essentially, when you want to create any sort of text inside your user interface that is just not very basic, I would recommend using the TextMeshPro instead of just a regular text, since it has a lot more options when it comes to customizing your text. So what I'll do is I'll create a TextMeshPro text type. And as you can see, inside my hierarchy, we have a canvas and we also have a text, which is a TextMeshPro type text. And you'll also notice that we get something else here, because like I said, TextMeshPro is a asset that was grabbed by Unity at some point. So that means that we do actually need to import the TextMeshPro package into our Unity project if we want to use it. And it does give us this little pop-up here that says, oh, wait, hold on a second. I can kind of tell you did not include the TextMeshPro inside your project. Very conveniently, if you did not get that package yet, we can just go ahead and click import TMP essentials. And as you can see, we can also import some extra things for TextMeshPro, like examples and extra things. But now let's just go ahead and leave that alone and just close this thing down. I have so many dumpster trucks or something outside my window right now. So now with everything installed, as you can see, we have these three elements inside our hierarchy. We have the canvas, which like I said, is just like the basic container for every UI element that we might want to use. We also have a TextMeshPro, which is the one that actually contains the text inside of it. And then we also have something called an event system. The event system is just basically going to handle any sort of user input when we want to interact with the UI elements. So if I have a menu and I want to be able to click on one of the menu buttons, that is something that goes in and actually handles that type of thing. So we don't really want to do anything with the event system for now. But what we want to do is we want to go in and actually make changes to our text, because right now we can't actually see anything inside our scene. But you will notice that there is a white line inside your project that has a small corner centered inside the center of your project. And this might make you ask questions on why they decided to do it this way. I sometimes wonder why this was made in such a way. And I can't answer you why it is like this. It's just like this. But if you want to make any sort of user interface inside your game, if I were to actually double click on my canvas, you can see that we can now see the canvas, which is going to be the user interface for our game, which basically means that our game is sitting down here in the corner, hiding away. And this is our canvas, which is going to be around the border. And for some reason, Unity decided that, you know what? The user interface needs to go in the top right corner of whatever game they're making right now. So as you can see, we have the text down here, which is the TextMeshPro, and I can actually sort of grab it and just drag it up in the top here. There is something we want to do first though, because right now our canvas needs to match our game view in a proper way. If we were to play this on a certain resolution monitor, the user interface is going to look a certain way. And then if we were to play on another resolution monitor, it is going to get out of proportions and not match that resolution. So the way we can fix that is we can go into our canvas and click it. And then down here where it says constant pixel size in the UI scale mode, we want to change it to scale with screen size. And in this sort of way, it is now going to proportionally fit whatever device you might be sitting on, whether it being, a mobile, or it might be, a 2K monitor or something. You'll also notice that our text disappeared, and that's because it actually jumped up to the top here, because now it is actually trying to scale a little bit differently than it did before. So I can now grab my text, drag it down, and just sort of slide it in how I want it to be. I can also resize my text, so I'll resize it from a font size of 36, which is over here in the inspector, down to something like 22. I'll go ahead and center it as well with the alignment. And I'm just going to make sure that everything looks like I want it to, basically. You can see there's a lot of settings over here. Kind of reminds you of, other text programs, how you can change the spacings and underlines and such things. You can do all sorts of things inside our TextMeshPro, which you cannot do if you had chosen a regular text element. Now, instead of it saying new text, let's go ahead and put in an example, because I don't want it to be new text when we actually play the game. What I want it to say is something like the number of fireflies that you picked up. So I could say, to start with here, that we have 0 fireflies. And this is basically just going to act as a placeholder, because at some point we will need to go in and actually update the number and update the text inside this element. For now, just to see what we're messing with, write something in that makes sense. Now, it is possible to go in and change the font, and you'll actually notice that if I were to select a new font, we don't really have that much to choose from. If we did decide to install those extra things at the beginning, then we might have gotten some extra fonts to choose from, but usually when I make a game, I like to have my own custom font. So we'll also talk about how to do that at the end of the video. So importing new fonts is something we do after we learned how to update the interface and all that. So let's go ahead and close this down and go down to where it says color gradient, because right now we could just change the color of the text. So I could change it into, red or something else. But what if I want to have a gradient? Then what I could do is I could actually go ahead and say I want to do a color gradient. And then we get 4 different colors that we can choose from. And these are going to be the colors on the corners of the text. So depending on how we want the gradient to function, we can change these colors. But a small trick I want to show you in case we want to have this color gradient for many different pieces of text inside our game is that we can actually go down inside our assets folder. And let's just go ahead and create a new folder. I'm going to call this one text gradients. Then I'll go inside the folder, right click, go over to where it says create, go down to where it says TextMeshPro. Then I want to create a color gradient. If we were to click this color gradient, we could call it something else if we wanted to. And we can go ahead and paste in whatever color code we want this text to be. Now I do actually have some colors on the side here, so I'm just going to copy paste, and you can just sort of copy paste the same colors if you wanted to. I'll just paste it in here, like so, and like so. So we have a green at the top and a yellow at the bottom, because I think that kind of matches with a firefly. So with this, I can now go back inside our text element or TextMeshPro element, and I can add the gradient inside our color preset. So I can drag it in. And as you'll notice, our text now have a gradient color theme. So again, there's a lot of different settings inside TextMeshPro. What you can also do if you were to scroll down a little bit is you can see we have some extra settings down here, which is where we can, add an underlay, we can add outlines. So I could say I want to have an underlay, and then I can click to expand, and then we can just sort of like, pick how we want the underlay to be. So I can say I want to have a color for it. I want to offset a little bit so I can, as you can see, we get this little drop down. And again, you can just sort of mess around with the settings here and get the look that you want for your text. I'm just going to go ahead and keep it like this. And then we'll start talking about how to actually update the text inside our text box here. So what I'll do is I'll go back inside our assets folder. I'll go inside my scripts folder, and I'm going to right click, create C# scripts. And I'm going to call this one score manager. What I'll do is I'll take this script and I'll drag it onto my canvas, which is up here. And I'll go ahead and open up this score manager inside my Visual Studio. The first thing we're going to do in here is that we do need to do something we haven't done before, which is to add in a new namespace so we can actually mess around with the user interface. So up where we have using Unity Engine, we do need to add another line called using TMP TMPro. Because with this, we now have access to the proper data types and everything when it comes to using TextMeshPro inside our code. So what I'll do is I'll go inside my class called Score Manager, and I'm going to be creating two new fields. The first one is going to be the actual TextMeshPro objects, and the second one is going to be the number that is going to be the score that we update the score with inside the actual text inside our game. So the first field, which is going to be the TextMeshPro object, is going to be a public TMP underscore text. I'm just going to call it something like text score, just to give it some kind of name. And then we're going to create a float that is going to be the actual number that we update inside our user interface. And then we're going to create a float that is going to be the actual number that we update the score with. So I'll say that we have a public float. I'll just call this one score. And now you'll notice that we've done something that we haven't done before, which is to call our fields public instead of private. And this is something that we're doing for a very specific reason. The first one being that right now we need to actually tell it which text element is going to be text score. And we also need to grab this score from another game object inside our game. So in order to access this data from outside the script, we need to make sure these are public. And I can actually show this by going inside our Unity. And as you can see, if I were to pick my canvas, you can see inside my score manager script, we now have a text score and a score that we can actually change inside the Unity interface itself. So what I need to do is I need to tell it which one is going to be the text score. So I'll take my text element, which is the TextMeshPro, and I'll drag it in there just to tell it that this is going to be the one we want to make changes to. So with this, we can now go back inside our code, because now we actually assigned something to the text score here. And I can go inside my start and tell it what I want to have inside my text when we start the game for the first time. So I want to reference to my text score, and I want to say I want to change the text. I'm going to set it equal to the score, which we have up here. And now you'll actually notice that the score is a float data type, and I want to convert it to a string. So I'll use a function called toString, parentheses. And then I want to add an actual string behind here. So I'll say plus, double quotes, and I'll say space, fireflies. Now, we didn't actually assign any sort of text to our score yet, so we do need to do that. So inside our start, I do want to take my score, and I just want to set it equal to 0f. And this is just basically going to make sure that every time we start our game from the start, it's going to make sure the score has been set to 0. But now I do want to, as I'm playing the game, make sure that the score is constantly being updated inside our interface. So what I'll do is I'll copy this line of code, and I'll just sort of paste it inside our update. You could also, if you wanted to, just leave this line out, just delete it and just keep the update inside here. But because of the way that these methods are called when it comes to, when they are called when we start the game, I do think it's a good idea that we also include it inside our start method to make sure that this text has been included inside our user interface before we actually can see anything when we start the game. So with this, we're actually done with this script here. So I can actually go ahead and go back inside Unity. And now what we need to do is we need to open up our Firefly controller from the previous episode. And if you didn't follow the previous episode, it's very simple. It's just basically whenever our player touches this specific firefly or coin or whatever it might be that you included inside your game that has to be picked up, then we have a script attached to that object that we can pick up that simply destroys the object when we pick it up. It's very basic. Inside where we have the onTrigger enter 2D, we want to make sure that before we destroy the object, that we just simply update the user interface inside the other script that we just created. And this is also a very good point to teach you how to actually access and manipulate data from other scripts inside Unity. So if you have two game objects and one game object needs to change something inside this game object script, then this is how you would do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a field. So I'll go inside my class here. And whenever we want to create a field that has to contain a script, we just simply name it the data type that the script is called inside our project. So what I would do here is I would say I have a private script called Score Manager, which actually pops up here as a suggestion. And then I just give it some kind of name. So I could call it Score manager with the lowercase s. And then we do need to include a start method, which is the start method that we have built into Unity. So I do need to say void start. And just like with any other components, when we want to attach it to our fields inside our code, we do need to make sure we do the get component function. So let's say we have a score manager that needs to be equal to get component. And then I want to make sure I get a component called score manager. So I want to include that inside my little arrows. But now this isn't going to quite work, because right now we're saying that we want to find a component off of the game object that this script here is attached to. And that is not what we want to do. We want to grab a script from another game object somewhere inside our game. And now there's a couple of ways we could grab that game object so we can actually get the proper component. The first way is we could go up and create a public field, just like before inside the score manager. And we could just call this one a game object type and call it something like GM for game object. And what we would then do is inside Unity, we would then drag and drop the game object from the hierarchy into the script inside the inspector. And then we would know, okay, so this is the game object. And then we would just simply go down here, say GM dot get component blah, blah, blah. So just to kind of show you with this, we could then go inside Unity. And if I were to click on one of the fireflies, you can now see that inside our inspector, we now have a GM empty field that we can drag the canvas into, because that is the one where we have the score manager script attached to it. And this would actually work. We would now have access to the script. However, I like to do it in a different way. So going back inside my code, instead of having to create this public game object, I do like to just sort of find whatever script that I have inside my game without having to do this sort of referencing. So what I like to do instead is I like to go in and say we have a game object, and do notice that I'm actually writing this with a capitalized G, which means that it's not this current game object that the script is attached to. And I want to run a method called find, parentheses, punctuation. And then inside the find method here, we can just simply write the name of the game object inside the hierarchy that we want to access. So right now it is called canvas. And using this small line of code, we now do the exact same thing as writing a public field that we can then fill in by dragging and dropping inside Unity and doing all that. But you do need to be aware that you can't have multiple objects inside your hierarchy with the same names now, because otherwise you would be confusing your code with what are you going to be grabbing inside the hierarchy. So do note that you should probably name it something unique inside your hierarchy so you can only grab that one item. With this line of code, we can now access the script. So what we can do is we can go inside our if statement down here, and right before we destroy the game object, and we can now say that we want to grab the score manager dot and then the name of whatever field or method we might have inside our score manager. So right now we have something called score, and I'm going to set this one equal to itself plus 1. And the very quick way of doing that is just simply by saying plus equal to, and then set it equal to 1. Now this is a float, so we do want to make sure that we write an F behind it just so we don't forget. And with this, we're now updating the score manager score by taking its current value and then adding 1 to it. And this is all we need to do in order to get this working. So going back inside Unity, you can now see that if I were to actually play this game, and by the way, just so you don't get confused about where's my game, just double click the player or something inside the hierarchy, and then you can see, it's scrolling into the player. He's still down here, he hasn't disappeared. And if I were to play the game, you'll notice that the UI interface, even though it was way over there in the corner, is appearing inside our game. So I can actually run around. And if I were to run into the Firefly, it is now updating the number inside my user interface that we have inside the game here. So it says 3 and 4. And then you could do something like game completed or something at the end there. And with this small trick, we can now update the user interface. Now there's something else that we need to talk about, which is importing custom fonts, which is not as easy as if you had just used a regular text element, because if you had just used a regular text element, you could just take a downloaded font and then import it into Unity and drag and drop it into the font. But because we're using TextMeshPro, it works a little bit differently. So what you will need to do is, first of all, you need to find a font. So I'll just go ahead and find it here. And as you can see, I have Google Fonts open here, which is a great place if you want to download fonts. I'm just sort of gonna figure out, what I'm searching for here. So I could actually say that my sentence should be 0 fireflies, just so we know exactly how this is going to look like. I'm just going to scroll down and find one I think looks really nice. I think this one looks really good. Architect's Daughter. I'll just sort of click it. And once you have it open, you just download the family. and it's going to download for you. And with the font downloaded, you just simply unpack it. So I'm going to extract it here. And then we take the font. I'm just going to drag it over to the side here. And I'm going to go back inside Unity, go back inside my assets folder. And I'm going to right click and create a new folder called fonts. Inside my fonts folder, I'm just simply going to drag and drop my font in here. And now we need to install the font inside Unity in order to convert it into something that TextMeshPro can actually use. So I do need to go up inside Window. I need to go down to TextMeshPro. And then I want to select the one called Font Asset Creator. So with this one, I'm just going to drag it up to the top here so we can actually see it in full view. And with this open, you're going to drag the font into the source font file. Then you want to just keep everything as a default. You don't need to touch anything here. And just say generate font atlas. With it created, you now just click save. And then you save it inside your fonts folder or somewhere inside your Unity project where you think it makes sense. I'm just going to save it in the same place. And with it saved, I can now go back inside my TextMeshPro. And inside where we have the font asset, I can now click it. And now you'll see that we actually have Architect's Daughter in here, so I can actually choose it and now make the game font look different. So if I were to play the game again, you'll now notice that we have a different font. Now it is kind of like hard to see because of the drop shadow not being quite like it should be. But we do have a new font. We can always make changes to it. But just double click. And again, we can just go down to where it says underlay and we can just add it. Drag it down a little bit. And now you can see, we can actually see what is going on up here. So if we were to pick something up, you can see it now updates. So this is basically how we import a new font when it comes to TextMeshPro. It is quite easy to do. You just need to figure out how to do it. And then, then you have a new font. So with all that, we now know how to create a basic user interface inside our video game. And we also know how to update it using some, sort of text and how to access it inside our code, how to grab a script from another script. There's a lot of different things that we learned in this episode that is very useful, I think, because you use it constantly. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next video.